sure it does that, because I've had where it doesn't. And we are good. And then I'm going to share my screen. And get this thing going. All right, so can everyone see my screen, I hope? Heather, does it look good?
It looks great.
All right, so I want to welcome everyone for joining us on our Composting 101 webinar. This is part of our our sustainable series that we were offering this winter. My name is Mindy Murdoch, and I'm the Director of Recreation Services with the Zionsville Parks and Recreation Department. And joining me tonight is Heather Mayberry, who is owner of Earth Mama Compost. And we're going to kind of go over an overview of what composting is, the benefits of composting, some different types of composting, and then what you should be composting if you do decide to do so. So I know we won't hit every question or answer there is out there, but hopefully we'll do a few of them. And the reason that we're really offering these sustainable initiatives, first of all, just to educate the community, but secondly, they are a part of our Zionsville's Climate Action Plan. And so the Climate Action Plan is available on the Town of Zionsville's website. It's actually now as like an issue flip book, so you can flip through it. But this really falls straight into the solid waste portion of our Climate Action Plan, which looking at bringing actually curbside composting to Zionsville. And great to have Heather here because she is instrumental in actually giving that as an option. So we're gonna make sure we leave time for her to talk about that. And then we'll have time at the end to answer questions that you might have if you're considering doing curbside composting. But real quick, and I'm going to let Heather get into all the benefits of it, but just, what is composting in general? So if we're here, hopefully you know a little bit if you're tuning in, but really composting is the process of taking organic matter that we're not using, whether it's leaves or food scraps, veggies, and allowing it to break down to produce fertilizer that you can use for your soil, to enrich your soil and for use for your plants. So really, we know this, that everything pretty much decomposes eventually. But when you're composting, you're actually speeding up that process because you're trying to create an environment that's going to be ideal for those decomposers, those bacteria and fungi and worms. If you decide to do vermicomposting, we're really to get in there and do their work. And then the resulting matter, what we call compost or black gold, I've heard people call some people, is just, it looks like garden soil, but it's very fertile. And so you can use it for your gardens, you can use it for your house plants, you can use it in agriculture, even if you're composting it in a large enough amount. So, but Heather, I'm going to turn that over and you can tell me if I need to click faster or slower on slides. But really talking about, the benefits of why do we really want to look into composting?
I need to move us. Okay. So the most important thing that got me into composting was kind of looking into the waste stream and understanding what happens to our food waste after it goes to the landfill. So at this point, 40 to 50% of our food waste is in the landfills is from homes. So that's about, I got confused. I'm sorry, I'm not good at public speaking.
That's okay.
Okay.
You don't have to read the slides. You just talk about whatever it is.
That was.
They can read, you can talk.
So the issue with the landfill is that once the food waste gets there, it doesn't really go away. So according to the EPA, only 20 to 50% of our food breaks down within the first 15 years. And just to give you an idea of what's actually going to break down, one thing that's not on that list is guacamole. So I don't know what's breaking down if guacamole isn't doing it. So, and at this point, our homes have about 216 pounds of food waste coming out per person per year. So that is a substantial amount of food waste that's going to the landfill from each person in the US. So the other problem, so we have minimal landfill space, which is an issue. But the problem that I see as far as the environment is concerned is that methane gas is actually one of the gases that comes from the food waste that goes into the landfill. About 50% of the gases that are a byproduct of throwing food into the landfill is methane, and about 50% is carbon dioxide. Methane gas is 25 times more potent for the environment than carbon dioxide. So it's really, and that's over 100 years. So if you compound it down to 20 years or 10 years, the number is higher. And because because the food waste, when it goes to the landfill, doesn't break down, the amount of carbon that's coming off of it is actually coming off of it for decades. So if we can put it into the compost pile, then there are so many benefits. The first thing is that the compost is great for your soil. It's great for your plants. It improves the soil's health. You can see all the wonderful things that's in compost if you read that. And what's fascinating to me is when you make a choice in your garden to use compost or to use fertilizer, the fertilizer makes this big, beautiful plant, right? And you've noticed that those big, beautiful plants take a little bit more water and a little bit more care. The reason is that the larger the plant grows with synthetic fertilizer, the thinner the cell walls become. And so you have to actually, the plant is more susceptible to disease and more susceptible to drought. But if you use compost instead, that same plant is going to be smaller in size, but it will be more resistant to those diseases and to drought because the cell walls are thicker, and it's just a healthier plant all around. Another piece that's a major benefit of using compost is that we're actually affecting our carbon stores. Carbon stores are the ocean, the forest, rocks, trees. Another carbon store, though, is the soil. About 100 years ago, our soil could retain carbon for longer, and now it's losing carbon more quickly. So the soil from hundreds of years ago would trap carbon for 1,000 years or so, and now it's only trapping it for 50 or 60 years. And it's because our soils are depleted. So if we add a half an inch of compost, this is from the Marin Project out in California. If you use a half an inch of compost over an acre of land and then plant over it, you're actually trapping 4.4 metric tons of CO2 over 3 years. So imagine if all the homeowners were to just use a half an inch of compost over their land in Indiana. I mean, that would be a drastic change for our environment. So it's really important to me to show how the little things that we do can really affect our environment and how powerful we can be as homeowners. So one thing that I try to do on reducing personal food waste So I try to make sure I'm looking at what's coming into my home, because I know that I have the power to reduce that number of 216 pounds of food per year per person in my home. If I am only bringing in what I need, and then making sure that I, use the foods that are more perishable first, then I can really make a huge impact. So yeah, when I look at the numbers of 60 million tons of produce that's thrown away every year, it's an impact. So it's really important, if just that 60 million tons of food waste, the produce was composted instead of put into the landfill, that impact would be great, because when our food goes into the compost pile, it actually only produces carbon for a month, maybe 3 months, compared to going to the landfill, where it's going to put off carbon for decades, possibly. And when our food waste goes to the landfill, it's also putting off the methane gas we've talked about. But when it breaks down naturally, it actually does not put off methane gas. So that's an important piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. We'll keep on going. Yeah. I know there's so much information. I'm sure people have so many questions. So, but yeah, you kind of touched on that. So really the ingredients in compost, and this kind of falls in line with, naturalists, and we talk about what do animals and things need to survive. Well, organisms, decomposers are animals, so they're going to be very similar to us as far as they're going to need similar key ingredients to survive. We just don't think of it the same way. But their big ones are they're going to need nitrogen, carbon, air, and water, right? So the 4 big things. So the nitrogen is really what they're going to get in what we call the greens. So if you're thinking about composting, those are going to be like our fruits and vegetables and grass clippings, kind of the wet stuff. The browns are going to be the carbon, and that's going to allow them to kind of bulk up. So that's where a lot of people will put things like paper or branches or dried leaves. So they're not going to have that moisture to them. And so that's the reason why there's always that ratio. If you're trying to compost at home, that's important that you're trying to stick to that ratio, because you don't want too much wet. You want to be able to have that dry component as well. So you're finding kind of a mixture of 2 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, or even 4 parts carbon, or those brown materials to 1 part of your wets, your greens. And then of course, the biggest one, I think this is why some people fail at home, is that to keep in mind that if you're going to do a compost pile or a compost bin, or even if you're going to do worms, is that you have to kind of keep in mind of the air and the water. So, you're going to have to, if you want it to actually break down, it has to have enough moisture to it, not too much, because then things go a little sour. And then you're also going to have air. So a lot of compost, and we're going to get to the different types, they actually will help move and kind of rotate your compost pile so that you're allowing air to get in there to really get those decomposers to break down that material quickly. So I know that's one thing a lot of people were asking was, what are the different types of home composting? So we'll go that one. And then Heather has another type that if you're kind of daunted by, I don't really want to know if I want to do this at home myself, you can still compost. And that's the nice thing. So, you can compost indoors, you can compost outdoors. So it's really as complicated as you want. The biggest thing is as you're looking at your home, as first is to figure out where do you live? Are you in an apartment? Are you in a townhome? Do you have acres and acres of land that you can utilize? And, how much space do you want to designate for your compost? Another thing to look at is really how much waste are you producing? And what kind of waste are you producing? Are you really just primarily going to be your kitchen scraps that you're doing? Or do you also have a large garden or yard clippings, grass clippings, leaves that you want to try to build into a compost pile? And then the final one is really how much time do you want to spend in your composting process? So all of that's very particular and specific to each of us. We're all a little bit different. I have some room, but I don't have a lot of time in my own personal to go out there and rotate out a compost bin. So that's probably why I don't have a compost bin, but I've used worm composting because to me, that's a little bit easier for me personally. But so we'll get into some of the types here. So usually when people think compost, the first thing they think is compost bins. And then they think they have to run out to Lowe's or Home Depot or one of the other stores and buy tons of wood and build these ginormous big bins that you see right here and set it up in the corner of their backyard and throw everything in. There's different types. So probably the most well-known are the actual closed compost bins. And these are going to be more of kind of the do-it-yourselfer. You can make them yourself with materials, or you can actually purchase. So the picture here is one that is, one you can purchase online. Usually they are open at the bottom because that's going to allow the extra moisture and nutrients to kind of trickle out of the bottom of your bin. So it's not going to hold it all in place. And they're normally about 3 foot in any direction. So if you've got a 3 by 3 by 3 section in your garden, this might be an option for you. The nice one of them, they're usually like a darker material if you're purchasing them. So that's going to really help hold in a lot of the heat and the moisture to help break down those materials. But the important thing for this style of bin is you're going to make sure when you're putting in your compost is you're actually looking at putting it in layers. So that will naturally start to break down. And if you look at the picture also, it has a lot of holes for aeration. So again, so air can get into it to help those decomposers do their work, because without air, then you're almost making your own little landfill in the backyard, and they're not going to be able to do the work that they're supposed to be doing. You can go a little bit larger, and they do what they call open top bins, which are in the back. You can see the pallet ones that people have made, or even just, these are just hardware cloth that people have rolled together. The difference between like an open top bin versus one of the closed ones is that if you're going to be putting in a lot of kitchen scraps, these open bins probably aren't the best option, just because there's no way of preventing something like a skunk or a raccoon or mice from getting into those bins and actually consuming. And probably the last thing your neighbors want is to have a lot of wildlife being attracted to your compost pile. So, but that is another option, is to go a little bit larger if you're looking primarily at doing yard wastes. So if you have a big garden, or if you do a lot of flower gardening, you want to be able to put that material in there. So that is another option. And then the third kind of type of bin, a little bit smaller scale, and these are also great for kitchen scraps. And that's going to be your what they call tumblers. And they might be raised like this one, or I've seen ones that are actually kind of on the ground that you can roll. But the way this one works is that you want to make sure that you're actually adding in some water occasionally. But then every about once a week or so, you're going to rotate or roll your tumbler. And that's going to kind of keep things aerated. So again, it's a great one for kitchen waste. But if you're going to have a lot of yard waste, it's going to fill up pretty fast. Although these get, if you're really in ideal temperatures and water and materials, about a month, then it's going to start to really break down. And so you'll get compost fast on those. Some other ones, I know Heather mentioned this at the beginning. Yeah, you can do as easy as dig a hole and stick your stuff in the ground if you want to. And it has a name. So it's actually called trench composting. And it's digging a trench about 12 to 24 inches deep and filling that with your organic waste. So again, probably, unless you want to put a lot of holes in your yard, this would be good if you have a big garden area. And then you would fill soil on top of that one. And then the goal is then you're actually supposed to plant on top of that. So this isn't one where you're gonna, later on dig up your trench and actually harvest the compost and put it somewhere else. You're actually putting the nutrients where you want them to be. So I do know a lot of gardeners that do large scale gardening that they will go this route, that they will do trench composts, they will cover it, and they'll leave it for that season. And then the next season, they'll actually plant their vegetables on top of where that was, because they know that those nutrients have broken down and they can use them then for their plants to grow. So it's not always ideal for just people in your backyard, but it is an option that is out there and some people do utilize it. And the one that I probably know the most about, and that is your worm composting, or what they call vermicomposting. This one it's nice because you can go full scale and have a huge bin that you can leave outside or in your garage, or you can do something very small with just a 5-gallon bucket and put it underneath your kitchen sink. The biggest one is that you need to make sure that you keep your worms fed, but not overfed. And so it is kind of a trial and error, but once you figure out how to do it, it actually works very, very well. The worms kind of take care of themselves. And when we talk about worms, it's not like you're going to go to the bait shop and get night crawlers. They're a particular type of worm called a red wiggler that, they feed off of, and they prefer compost type material versus like garden soil. So don't take your red wigglers and just throw them out in the garden. They're not going to survive. They really do need to be in that environment. And they also don't do well in extremely hot. So in the middle of summer, you wouldn't want to put your worms out in the sun. You're going to want to have a shaded area. Like I said, inside of a garage might be a good one, just so they don't get overheated, just the same as you don't want to freeze them in winter. So it's a little trial and error. I know people that have put them in their basement, and then they have their, own indoor composting. So, and these guys, but they're a lot of fun to do, but it's just another option. And again, mostly for kitchen scraps. You're probably not going to throw a lot of your grass clippings and things in there, especially if you have any kind of fertilizers or chemicals on your grass, because you'll end up killing off your worms, which isn't what you want. And then the final one we have kind of goes back to our climate action plan, and that is the ability to, not do compost in your backyard, but actually, basically have curbside pickup for your compost. And I'm going to let Heather talk a little bit more about Earth Mama Compost and how curbside pickup actually works.
It's really easy. We love doing our curbside compost program in Zionsville. So many people have been really excited about it. So what we do is we stop by, you send us an email to let us know that you'd like to get started, or you fill out your form. And then on our first day of service, we just stop by your house and drop you a kit. Our kit includes a 5-gallon bucket with a liner, and then a little countertop bin, which is 2.5 gallons. And then we give you a roll of 25 liners to get started. And then we send you an email that tells you how to keep your bucket clean, what you're allowed to put into it, and how to contact us, how to pay, all that information. And then we're always available if you have questions through email or my cell phone. And then we just drop by every other week and pick it up for you. Seems like a lot of folks like it. And we give you an extra bucket if the first 5-gallon bucket isn't sufficient. It doesn't cost us any extra really to pick up 2 buckets instead of 1. And we want to make sure that people have access and have enough space to get all their goodies out of their house. So, and then right now, actually, for all of our clients, we're giving a 5-gallon bucket of compost back to say thank you for Earth Day here in April. And we are also donating in the name of our clients to an urban farmer who is concentrating on feeding this food insecure. So that's kind of our whole program.
And so when people, so when you pick up their compost, basically their kitchen scraps and other items, what happens to that?
We take it to Green Cycle. Green Cycle composts it, and then they sell it to landscapers and gardeners. So, and then
yeah, so if you want to, do you want to talk about, because this is kind of, it's almost the same really, regardless of whether you're composting in your backyard or composting with curbside pickup. Maybe a little difference if you're trying to do worms, but Heather, do you want to talk about what you can put in a compost?
So for us, we have, it's a little less stringent, I think, because if you have corn on the cob and you've slathered it with butter and cheese or whatever makes it yummy for you, we can still take that, or cooked vegetables, or a minimal amount of fats. Whereas in the home composter, you really don't want those fats in there because it'll draw the critters. And so, our list is at the bottom, and we try to take as much as we really can. So that we can really reduce the amount of trash you have going out every week. I don't see a whole lot of differences either. So, yeah.
I do know a few. So if you are going to be doing your own backyard compost, because most people in their backyards, whereas Green Cycle, more likely those piles are going to heat up because they have a massive amount of material, and those piles are going to get very hot. So things like plants or seeds, they're going to start to break down. Whereas, we'll flip to the next slide. Whereas if you're doing composting really in your backyard, your little compost pile isn't going to get those temperatures the same amount. So there are materials, if you're looking at doing compost in your own backyard, that you want to make sure you stay away from. The biggest one is pet waste. So your cat litter, your dog waste, none of that should end up anywhere in your compost pile, because your bin or your compost will never get hot enough to actually kill off any kind of pathogens or bacteria or parasites or things that might be in that waste. Again, it's got to get, I don't remember the amount, but it is super high. It's even hard for even large facilities to make it hot enough to kill off those pathogens. So leave the pet waste out of your compost bin just to keep yourself and your family, especially if you're putting it on anything you're going to eat, safe. Another one is that, and this goes even for, the Green Cycle and Heather, is you don't want to put things that aren't organics, like plastics. Even a lot of what they even call a lot of the biodegradable like utensils, like the plates and cups, and some of those, they really, even though they say they are, really aren't going to break down. So don't go buying the biodegradable, bamboo plates and sticking them in your compost pile at home, because they're just going to sit there. They're really not going to do anything. Some of the glossy type paper, especially the specialized ones, just because of the materials in that gloss, can be toxic. And again, if you're going to be composting and putting this on anything that you would want to eat, you want to be very careful on that one. And then the other big one would be any kind of diseased plants, any invasive species, whether if you're out there pulling garlic mustard, don't put it in your compost pile, because then you're going to spread compost with garlic mustard seeds all over your yard in a few years. But yet those diseases, same as with the pet waste, if your plant died from a disease and you try to compost it, it doesn't mean you're going to kill that disease. So then you might be spreading that similar disease to your other plants when you go to spread your compost. So if you're not sure of why something died, best to just leave it out. Or like I said, try to find a facility where they can really get the heat that they're going to be able to break those diseases down. And then like Heather had said, you know, they are organic, but stuff, meat, fish, bones, dairy, fat, really all it's going to do is get very smelly, and it's going to attract a lot of flies and a lot of rodents, and you'll probably get a lot of very unhappy neighbors if they start smelling what's decomposing in your compost pile. So those are just a few things to kind of leave out if you're actually considering, or if you do compost at home. Just for your safety, if anything. So I think we, can kind of roll this up. I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see the chat with my thing open. And I'm going to say, does anybody have any questions for Heather or for myself, or maybe some words of wisdom if you do compost at home? That you would like to offer to others. We've got a good, plenty of time, a good 20 minutes to answer any questions that anybody might have. Or if Heather, if there's anything else you want to mention that might be beneficial to those that are tuning in either now or later when they watch the recording.
Oh, I wanted to mention as far as the compostable tablewares, even though our temperatures do get a little higher than in your backyard, we still don't take any of the compostable plastics. We will take the paper type compostable plates and cups, but we try to avoid the compostable plastics, partially because of greenwashing and, partially because they just don't always break down.
Okay. All right, so someone asked, can manure from cows be used in compost? If you allow, farm kid here, knowing this one, if you allow that manure to actually sit for long enough. So normally farmers will have an area where they will put the cow manure and they will allow it to sit on its own, and it will naturally, the bacteria in that manure will start to break it down. So if it breaks down naturally on its own, then it actually turns into its own type of compost. So a lot of times when you're buying the compost at some of the big box stores, a lot of that is like cow manure and things that have just been able to, what they call season. I wouldn't put fresh cow manure in my compost pile just because of the smell with it. But if you have that ability that you have a lot of cattle, you can definitely put it in an area if you're on a farm and allow it to season itself, and it will naturally kind of break down. And then, yes, it's a great compost for your garden. Not so much horse manure. Horse manure, you'll get a lot of seeds from other plants that they eat, and it can cause more weeds in your garden than anything else. And then Catherine asks, what's the balance of green and brown for ideal composting? Again, it's that 2-to-1 or 4-to-1. You're going to want to play with it with your compost bin, whatever you're doing. But the ideal one is you're going to have more of the brown materials. So whether it's paper, whether it's leaves, dried materials, to the wet. And you want to do, depending again on what type of bin you're doing, you're going to want to layer it. In the case of worms, they're actually going to be in a bedding of paper, so of the brown material, and then you're going to kind of bury little sections of what would be the vegetables and fruits in areas for the worms to travel to eat. If you're doing one of the stationary bins, you're kind of going to do layers of brown, then green, then brown. But again, you want definitely more brown than green. And that's just so it doesn't get too wet and it can start to break down. Any other questions from anybody? Concern about inks and dyes in paper and cardboard. Most of I think, maybe you might know a little bit more, Heather, but I think majority of a lot of the inks and dyes are going to be soy-based.
Yeah.
So it's really when you're getting into those special glossy papers or like photo papers and things where they'll have like a chemical added that you don't want to be adding into, you can put them in the recycling bin, but you don't want to add them into your compost. Yeah, but I think majority of what you would see anymore in like newspapers and magazines and things are going to have like a soy-based ink to them. Someone goes, Zionsville has so many wonderful parks. Did the town ever consider setting up an area where residents could bring composting materials? It could be manned by volunteers, and then when the composting materials are broken down, so it could be sold to folks for their own gardens. I'm happy to say the parks are looking into what it may take to become a certified composting facility. We are starting with just within our community gardens this year and next, and trying to capture some of the waste from our community gardeners, just the community gardeners, not open to the public. And then depending on how that rolls out and what it takes, the biggest one is having a location, possibly looking at rolling out, having some sort of compost ability, but it's in the process, but there's no guarantee on when it may happen, so. Oh, I don't know this one. Do you have any recommendations on how small cardboard would need to be broken down for compost and the best method to do that? Heather, you probably don't, they don't really need to, do they?
We don't really take cardboard.
Okay.
And I haven't seen a lot of cardboard being taken out to green cycle. One thing that I often use cardboard for is when I'm starting a new bed, I will put that down with a layer of compost underneath to bring the worms in, and the worms will eat the cardboard, and then put mulch on top and cut holes to put the plants into.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't imagine. I know it will break down. I just don't know what size you would need to break it down to.
I think a lot depends on the size of your compost bin itself. And that would be a thing to consider. Yeah, but yeah, if you were looking at adding cardboard as a potential brown, I would say you would do want to just not do one solid layer, because that might kind of interfere with that air movement that you need in your compost. But I don't think you need to chop it too small. But of course, I always I'll go the other way too. Cardboard is a very easily recyclable material, and it's a very sought after purchased recycled material. So it is one of those materials that if you're putting it correctly in your recycling bin, it is being sourced for other uses. It's not one that's going to end up in the landfill if you're recycling it correctly. So do you have a source for redworms for vermicomposting? There are several out there. If you do a search for, just do red wigglers. There are several different material, companies out there. You can even get them on Amazon. I wouldn't recommend you buy from Amazon just because there's no guarantee with Amazon. But I know some of the purchasers, they even use Amazon themselves. One I personally used, both for park programming as well as my own personal use, has been Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. I don't get any proceeds from him, so you don't have to go that route, but that's just one that I've used personally and have always had good success as far as, and trust me, you'll get this little package and you'll think there's no way that they're going to do what they do. They kind of come all clumped together. You give them about a good couple weeks, and trust me, they will eat, as they'll multiply as much as they need to, depending on how much food you give them. So
There's
if
a
you don't
local,
feed them, they're going to die off. If you feed them a lot, they're going to make lots of babies. So
there's a local worm guy, Castaway Compost. I believe he's over in Fishers.
okay.
So
See, I learn something new every time I do these. We have a couple more minutes just in case anyone has any last questions. Oh, look, there we go. All right, so you can answer that one, Heather. For curbside pickup, they get a complimentary bucket of compost, but after that, we're only giving and not getting back. Is that correct?
So we do it once a year. We give compost to folks once in April each year. But yeah, that would be accurate. You're welcome.
But it is a great option, especially, yeah, if you don't have the ability to compost in your own home because maybe of where you live, or maybe just, you can't handle for whatever reasons, maybe elderly, or that it's just too much, or you just don't have time, like me, to be sitting out there trying to flip my compost bin around when I need to. It is a great option to have.
Thank you. Yeah. So if we live close to Green Cycle, do you know if we can take our scraps there ourselves? So you can take your yard waste there, but you cannot take your food scraps there. You have to be certified by the state in order to do so.
And that's what the parks are looking into, is what does it take to become certified? So, so keep up on that one, because as it progresses, hopefully there'll be some announcements for people. But like I said, right now it's just talks for us. We're trying to see what we can do. All right, any last questions from anybody? I want to, as we're sitting here, Heather, I want to thank you so much for spending your evening with us and talking a little bit about compost and answering some questions. And again, like I said, this is going to be once I finish recording it, I will send everyone the link, but this is going to be up on the Town of Zionsville's YouTube channel, so people can watch it that maybe didn't be able to participate or didn't know about it. And then we'll also share it on the Zionsville Parks and Recreation Facebook page as well. So feel free, once you see those links, to share them to anybody else that might be asking questions. And yeah, everyone, if you're traveling tonight, because it is snowing, please be safe. And thank you guys so much for participating. But thank you, Heather.
Thank you for having me.